The griffin. The griffin was considered the most powerful animal in the known world, and ancient civilizations weren't being poetic about it. By fusing the lion, undisputed king of land animals, with the eagle, undisputed king of the sky, the griffin inherited both crowns simultaneously, producing a creature that ruled every domain except the sea. This wasn't a regional belief held by one culture. The griffin appears in the art and literature of ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, Greece, and medieval Europe, spanning roughly 5,000 years of human civilization without ever really going out of fashion. The earliest griffin imagery has been traced to the ancient Near East, around 3000 BCE, appearing on cylinder seals and palace friezes long before the Greeks gave it a name. In Scythian and Greek tradition, griffins were the guardians of vast gold deposits buried in the mountains of Central Asia, specifically in the region around modern-day Kazakhstan and Mongolia. And they were not passive guardians. They actively hunted anyone who came looking. The one-eyed tribe called the Maspians spent their entire mythological existence locked in an eternal war with griffins over this gold, a conflict detailed by the Greek writer Herodotus and later Aeschylus, which tells you how seriously the ancient world took the threat. Paleontologist Adrienne Mayer proposed in her 2000 book, The First Fossil Hunters, that the griffin legend may have originated with Protoceratops fossils found in the Gobi Desert, a beaked four-legged dinosaur skull that, to an ancient traveler who'd never seen a dinosaur, might look disturbingly like something between a bird and a beast. This remains a hypothesis rather than proven fact, but it's the kind of hypothesis that makes you look at the griffin very differently. In medieval Europe, griffins were harvested for parts in a very literal commercial sense. Their talons, which were actually narwhal horns or antelope horns sold by merchants who understood their market, were fashioned into goblets and sold as genuine griffin claws, prized because they were said to change color in the presence of poison. Several of these griffin claw cups survive in European church treasuries today. The griffin's heraldic career was equally distinguished. It appears on noble coats of arms across England, Germany, and Poland, consistently representing vigilance, strength, and the willingness to defend what belongs to you, which is, when you consider the griffin's origin story, entirely on brand. The qilin. The qilin is the gentlest apocalyptic omen in world mythology, which is a category of one. A chimeric animal combining dragon scales, deer antlers, ox hooves, and a lion's tail, it was said to walk with such cosmic care that its hooves never touched the earth. It floated just above the grass, crushing nothing, leaving no footprint, eating only plants that had already died naturally, rather than harming anything living. In Chinese tradition, dating back at least to the Zhou dynasty around 1000 BCE, the qilin's appearance was not a threat but a divine announcement. A great sage or virtuous ruler was either about to be born or had just died. According to traditional accounts, a qilin appeared to the mother of Confucius before his birth in 551 BCE, and another appeared just before his death in 479 BCE, Weeping Jade, a detail that was considered so significant it was recorded in the Zuozhuan, one of China's earliest narrative histories. The creature occupied one of the most prestigious positions in Chinese cosmology as one of the four sacred animals, alongside the dragon, the phoenix, and the black tortoise. The distinction that often gets overlooked is that it was the only mammal in that grouping, which in a tradition that placed dragons at the apex of the natural order, was a remarkable honor. Its Japanese form, called the kirin, evolved into a more explicitly dragon-like appearance over centuries of artistic interpretation, and today its name appears on one of Japan's most recognized beer brands, an afterlife that the creature's creators would almost certainly find baffling. The most remarkable chapter in the qilin's history came in 1414 CE, when the admiral Zheng, his fleet returned from the east coast of Africa bearing a gift for the Yongle emperor, a giraffe. The court erupted. Scholars and officials formally declared it a qilin, pointing to its spotted patterning, its towering impossible height, its silent and apparently gentle nature. And the emperor accepted the identification because denying a qilin would have been extraordinarily bad politics. The giraffe was paraded through the capital. Painters recorded it. The moment was treated as divine confirmation of the emperor's virtue. The actual qilin, somewhere above the grass it never touched, presumably had no comment. The thunderbird. The thunderbird does not belong to one mythology, it belongs to dozens, and the distinction matters. Across the Ojibwe, Lakota, Kwakwaka'wakw, Algonquin, Anishinaabe, and numerous Pacific Northwest nations, The thunderbird exists as a living spiritual presence, not a relic of ancient belief, and conflating these distinct traditions into a single creature flattens centuries of complex and independent cultural development. What the traditions broadly share is this: a bird of incomprehensible size whose wing beats generate thunder and whose blinking eyes produce lightning. Not as metaphor, but as literal physical mechanism. This was the explanation for storms, and it was a satisfying one, because it provided storms with an agent, a will, and a reason. In Ojibwe tradition, the thunderbirds serve a protective function, standing in permanent cosmic opposition to the underwater spirits and great horned serpents who dwell below the Great Lakes, malevolent forces that drag people and canoes into the depths. The storms that batter the surface of the lakes are not random weather events, but active battles between these two orders of being, which gives the thunder a narrative weight that meteorology has never quite matched. Pacific Northwest traditions describe a thunderbird large enough to hunt killer whales, snatching them from the ocean the way an eagle takes a fish, carrying them to mountain peaks to feed. Rock art. Depicting thunderbird figures has been found at sites across North America, with some carvings estimated to be thousands of years old, making it one of the most ancient and persistent beings in the entire catalog of North American mythology. Cryptozoologists have periodically claimed that reported pterosaur sightings in remote regions represent living thunderbirds, a claim that has no scientific support whatsoever, but speaks to how thoroughly the image of an enormous sky predator occupies the human imagination. The thunderbird has since become an enduring visual symbol across indigenous art, the name of a Ford automobile, a prestigious aerobatics team, and a Pokemon, a range of cultural afterlives that covers about as wide a spectrum as it is possible to cover. The basilisk. The basilisk was small, which somehow made it worse. Pliny, the Elder, writing in his natural history in the 1st century CE, described it as no longer than 12-finger width, a snake you could hold in your hand if your hand weren't immediately destroyed by the attempt. Its power had nothing to do with size. The basilisk killed with its gaze, with its breath, and, according to some accounts, with its hiss, and the effect was not gradual. Plants withered, stone cracked, the ground scorched. Pliny described a soldier who stabbed a basilisk with a spear from horseback and watched the venom travel up the weapon's shaft, killing both him and the horse before he could process what had happened, which suggests that even indirect contact through an inanimate object was sufficient. The King of Serpents, as it was universally titled, wore a crown-like white crest to mark its rank, and its scales had the greenish-copper tinge of something fundamentally wrong with the natural order. Its only natural predator was the weasel, which was immune to its venom for reasons no ancient writer satisfactorily explained, and the practical hunting strategy endorsed by Pliny himself was to send a weasel into the basilisk's lair and let them fight it out. The other known weakness was the mirror. The basilisk's lethal gaze reflected back at it was lethal to the basilisk, which made it the only creature in the ancient bestiary that could be killed by its own power, a weakness that is either a profound philosophical statement about the nature of destruction or a very convenient narrative solution, possibly both. By the medieval period, the basilisk had merged in popular imagination with the cockatrice, a creature hatched from a rooster's egg incubated by a toad, possessing a rooster's head on a serpent's body, creating a hybrid that was, if anything, more unsettling than either original. The Warsaw Basilisk of 1587 is the most documented alleged real-world encounter. According to accounts that circulated widely at the time, 2 young girls died in a cellar beneath a house, followed by a maidservant sent to investigate, and the deaths were attributed to a basilisk living below. A condemned criminal was reportedly fitted with a suit of mirrors and sent underground to kill it. Whether he succeeded depends on which version of the account you're reading, and historians note that the story's details shift considerably between tellings, but the city of Warsaw recorded it, discussed it seriously, and apparently slept better afterward. The Leviathan. The Leviathan gets an entire chapter of the Bible, Job 41, devoted to a detailed physical description, which is the kind of literary real estate that signals the ancient world considered this something more than a large animal. God's description in Job is methodical and almost clinical in its thoroughness. The Leviathan's hide cannot be pierced by sword, spear, dart, or javelin. Its breath sets coals ablaze. Its chest is like millstones. Its heart is as hard as stone, the hardest of stones. When it rises, the waves fear it. Its wake glows white on the water like spreading foam. The neck of the description is not terror. It is something closer to awe because God is using the leviathan as a demonstration of the limits of human comprehension. The implicit argument of the chapter is, you cannot understand or control this thing, therefore you cannot fully understand or judge me. It is possibly the most theologically sophisticated use of a sea monster in any literature. Scholars of ancient Near Eastern religion widely identify the Leviathan's predecessor as Lotan, the seven-headed sea serpent from the Ugaritic Baal cycle, a Canaanite text in which the storm god Baal defeats the chaos serpent as part of establishing divine order, and the parallel between Lotan and Leviathan, including their nearly identical names, is considered strong evidence of direct mythological inheritance. The Babylonian Tiamat, another primordial chaos water entity killed by a storm deity, Marduk, to create the world, sits in the same conceptual family. Talmudic tradition elaborated the Leviathan further. God reportedly created a male and female Leviathan, then killed the female and salted her flesh to prevent a breeding pair from destroying creation. The remaining male circles the ocean, and its flesh will be served as a feast to the righteous at the end of days. The medieval Christian imagination took the creature in an architectural direction. Manuscript illustrations and mystery plays depicted the mouth of the Leviathan as the literal entrance to hell, a great yawning maw at the edge of the world through which the damned disappeared. Thomas Hobbes appropriated the name entirely in 1651 for his political treatise on sovereign power, recasting the Leviathan as a metaphor for the state, an overwhelming, unchallengeable force that individuals surrender to in exchange for order. The original creature would probably not have appreciated the comparison, but the name stuck. The ammit. The ammit was not a god. This is important. Ancient Egyptians built temples to gods, offered them food and prayer, sought their favor, and feared their displeasure. Ammit received none of this. She did no cult, no priests, no shrines, because she was not a being to be appeased. She was a mechanism. Depicted in the Book of the Dead, specifically in the imagery surrounding Spell 125, she crouched beneath the scales of the Hall of Truths. The foreparts of a lion, the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, the head of a crocodile, the three animals that ancient Egyptians considered most dangerous, most lethal, most representative of the power to end a human life without ceremony. Her function was precise. When a dead soul's heart was placed on the scale and weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and cosmic order, and the heart was found heavier, burdened by the weight of a life poorly lived, Ammit ate it. This was not a punishment in any sense that translates easily into modern frameworks. There was no pain, no suffering, no hell. The soul simply ceased to exist in any form. The Egyptians called it the second death, and many considered it the more terrible fate, not because it hurt, but because it was permanent and absolute. To be eaten by Ammit was to be erased from the universe entirely. No afterlife, no memory, no trace. The heart had to be as light as the feather it was measured against, which meant a life without the weight of cruelty, dishonesty, greed, or injustice. The judgment was not theological. You weren't assessed on which gods you believed in. It was ethical, almost judicial in its precision. 42 assessor gods presided over the weighing, each responsible for a specific category of wrongdoing, and the deceased had to declare innocence on each count. Ammit waited during all of this. She was always there, always crouching. And this was also important. She was always hungry because the line of souls never ended and the scales never stopped tipping. She was not cruel. She was, in the Egyptian understanding, as necessary as gravity. The rock. The rock requires you to recalibrate your sense of scale before you can engage with it at all. In the second voyage of Sinbad the Sailor, from 1001 Nights, Sinbad is stranded on a deserted island and encounters what he initially takes to be an enormous white dome, smooth, featureless, and measuring 150 paces around its base. It is an egg. The rock that laid it arrives at nightfall, blotting out the sun as it descends, and Sinbad escapes the island by lashing himself to its leg with his turban while it sleeps and being carried across the sea. A mode of transportation that involved no consent from the rock whatsoever and considerable risk from the 1,000-foot drop beneath him. Marco Polo, writing around 1298 CE from his travels through the Eastern world, claimed that Kublai Khan had dispatched envoys to Madagascar specifically to investigate rock reports, and that they returned bearing a feather from the bird that he described as 90 palm fronds in length. Most scholars treat this particular detail with significant skepticism, given Marco Polo's documented enthusiasm for impressive figures. But the fact that the Khan of the Mongol Empire considered the rock worth investigating officially says something about how seriously these accounts were taken. The real-world connection that historians find most plausible is the elephant bird, Epiornis maximus, an extinct flightless bird native to Madagascar that stood approximately 3 meters tall and laid eggs with a volume roughly 160 times that of a chicken egg. Arab traders moving along the East African coast almost certainly encountered the bones and eggs of this creature and carried stories of them home, where they merged with older traditions of enormous sky predators to produce the rock in the form we know it. The rock appeared in the third and fifth Sinbad voyages as well, on the second occasion as an adversary. Sailors' stolen gems from its nest provoked a rock attack that destroyed the entire ship, with boulders dropped from altitude, which makes it the first aerial bombing run in literary history. The bird was never killable. It was categorized with storms and earthquakes, something you survived or didn't. The hydra. The hydra's defining feature wasn't the heads, it was the mathematics. Cut one head off and 2 grew back. This meant that every attack made the creature stronger, which fundamentally broke the problem-solving model that heroes operated on. Heracles, son of Zeus, and arguably the most physically powerful being in Greek mythology, could not defeat it through strength alone, because strength applied to a hydra was fuel for a hydra. The Lernaean hydra lived in the swamps near Lerna in the Argolid region of Greece, a site described in ancient tradition as one of the actual physical entrances to the underworld, which meant that Heracles was not simply clearing a monster from a marsh, but confronting something at the edge of death itself. Hesiod, writing around 700 BCE in the Theogony, identifies the Hydra as the offspring of Typhon and Echidna, which places it in a family that also includes Cerberus, the Chimera, the Nemean lion, and the Sphinx, a set of siblings that represents essentially the complete catalog of Greek worst-case scenarios. The head count varies depending on which source you're reading. Hesiod implies 9, later writers claim as many as 100, and the central head was described as immortal regardless of total number. The solution Heracles and his nephew Iolaus arrived at was surgical. Heracles would sever a head, and Iolaus would immediately cauterize the stump with a burning torch before regeneration could begin. One head, the immortal one, was eventually buried under an enormous rock. The Hydra's blood was lethally venomous, and Heracles dipped his arrows in it upon the creature's death, a decision that initiated one of mythology's longest and most catastrophic chains of cause and effect. Those poisoned arrows later killed the centaur Nessus, whose poisoned blood was collected by his widow and years afterward applied to a cloak given to Heracles as a gift, burning through his skin with a pain so unbearable that he built his own funeral pyre and climbed onto it voluntarily. The Hydra killed Heracles with a delay of decades, which is a level of patience the creature probably didn't intend. The word itself has never left the language. Any problem that multiplies when you attack it, a criminal network, a political opposition, an invasive species, is still called a Hydra problem, which means the Lernaean Hydra has been conceptually influencing military strategy, economics, and political science for approximately 2,700 years. Sleipnir. Sleipnir was described in the Prose Edda, written by Snorri Sturluson around 1220 CE, as simply the best of all horses, a gray stallion with 8 legs capable of traveling through all 9 realms of Norse cosmology, across land, through air, over sea, and most significantly into and out of hell itself. The 8 legs are striking enough visually, but what they meant functionally was that no terrain could stop it, and no boundary could contain it. In Norse cosmology, the boundaries between worlds were not metaphorical, they were real, guarded, and passage between them was genuinely difficult and dangerous. Sleipnir ignored all of this. Its parentage is the most unsettling origin story in the Norse corpus, which is saying something in a tradition that includes a man being swallowed by a wolf and Odin hanging from a tree for 9 days to gain knowledge. A giant builder arrived at Asgard and offered to construct its fortifications in exchange for the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freya. The gods, gambling that he couldn't finish in time, accepted. The giant's horse Svadilfari was doing so much of the building work that it became clear he'd win the bet. Loki, responsible for getting the gods into this situation, was told to fix it. His solution was to transform into a mare and lure Svadilfari away from the work. The horse followed. Loki, in mare form, became pregnant. Sometime later, Loki returned to Asgard and presented Odin with an 8-legged foal, which Odin accepted without, apparently, too many questions. Scholars have interpreted the 8 legs as a symbolic reference to the 8 pallbearers of a funeral bier, connecting Sleipnir to his most important function: guide between the living world and the dead. It was Sleipnir that carried Hermod on his 9-night ride through lightless valleys to reach the gates of Hel and negotiate for Baldur's return, a journey described in the Prose Edda as so dark and deep that Sleipnir had to physically leap the towering gates of Hel rather than pass through them. At Ragnarök, Odin rode Sleipnir into his final battle and was swallowed by the wolf Fenrir. No horse in any mythology has a more dramatic final entry in the record. The Sphinx. The Sphinx exists in 2 almost entirely separate mythological traditions that happen to share a body type. The Egyptian Sphinx, human-headed, lion-bodied, monumental in scale, is one of the oldest religious and artistic concepts in human civilization, appearing in the Old Kingdom of Egypt as early as the 4th dynasty, around 2500 BCE. The Great Sphinx of Giza was carved directly from a single limestone outcrop, measures approximately 73 meters in length and 20 meters in height, and is the largest monolithic statue on Earth. Its face is widely believed to represent the pharaoh Khafre, making it simultaneously a portrait, a guardian deity, and a political statement of incomprehensible size. It faces east, toward the rising sun, which in Egyptian cosmology was not a decorative choice. The Greek Sphinx is a different creature with an almost inverted moral function. Where the Egyptian Sphinx guarded and protected, the Greek Sphinx destroyed and consumed. Sent by the goddess Hera to punish the city of Thebes, the specific offense varies by source, it positioned itself at the city gate and posed a riddle to every traveler who passed. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? Every person who failed the riddle was eaten immediately. The Sphinx had been there long enough that Thebes was in genuine crisis, the city's trade routes were blockaded by a monster, and its king Creon had offered the throne and the widowed Queen Jocasta to anyone who could answer. When Oedipus arrived and answered correctly, a human being who crawls as an infant, walks upright as an adult, and uses a cane in old age, the Sphinx threw itself from a cliff and died. Its existence was apparently conditional on the riddle remaining unanswered, which raises interesting questions about what kind of creature is destroyed by a correct answer. The broader family of human-headed guardian beasts includes the Mesopotamian Lamassu, bull or lion body, human head, eagle wings, which stood in pairs at the gates of Assyrian palaces at Nineveh and Khorsabad around 700 BCE, creatures built to protect kings not through combat but through divine intimidation. The fenghuang. The fenghuang is sometimes called the Chinese phoenix, and the comparison is almost entirely wrong. The Western phoenix burns, dies, and resurrects from its own ash. The drama is in the destruction and return. The fenghuang does not die and does not burn. Its appearance is an announcement that something is already right with the world, not that something cataclysmic is occurring. It appears only during the reign of a virtuous ruler, vanishes when virtue declines. And in the entire span of Chinese literary and historical tradition, its appearances are treated as the most coveted of all omens. Emperors commissioned paintings, declared festivals, and sometimes adjusted their official policies upon allegedly receiving reports of a fenghuang sighting, because the political implications of the bird's approval were enormous. It is composite in the most deliberate and considered way. The head of a golden pheasant, the body of a mandarin duck, the tail of a peacock, the legs of a crane, the beak of a parrot, and the wings of a swallow. Each element representing the finest quality of a specific avian type, assembled into something that surpassed all of them. Its call contained all 5 notes of the Chinese pentatonic scale simultaneously, and its presence generated warmth, harmony, and music in the surrounding landscape. It ate only bamboo fruit, drank only from sacred springs, and roosted only in the wutong tree. A creature so discriminating in its requirements that it functioned as a living standard against which the natural and political world was measured. In dynastic China, the fenghuang was associated exclusively with the empress, holding the same symbolic rank as the dragon held for the emperor. Together, they represented the perfect balance of cosmic forces. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, unauthorized use of the fenghuang image in art or clothing was a criminal offense, making it one of the only mythological creatures in history to receive legal protection. Its image appears on Chinese decorative arts spanning more than 3,000 years. Bronze vessels, silk robes, palace tiles, and contemporary civic emblems. An unbroken visual tradition that no Western mythological creature comes close to matching. Yamata no Orochi. Yamata no Orochi is described in the Kojiki, Japan's oldest chronicle, compiled in 712 CE, with a physical specificity that most mythological monsters never receive. 8 heads, 8 tails. A body that simultaneously spans 8 valleys and 8 mountains. Eyes the color and brightness of winter cherries. A belly perpetually red and inflamed, perhaps from years of feeding. Moss and pine trees growing along its back the way they grow on old stone, because the creature was so ancient and so enormous that its body had become a landscape. It arrived at the home of an earthly couple each year to take one of their daughters, had done so for 7 consecutive years, and when the storm god Susanoo arrived in disgrace from the heavens, having been expelled from his divine post, he found the couple weeping over their last remaining daughter. His plan was not elegant, but it was effective. He instructed the family to brew 8 vats of sake and set them at 8 gates. The Orochi arrived, lowered all 8 heads simultaneously into all 8 vats, and drank until it collapsed. Susanoo spent the next period methodically dismembering it. Inside one of the 8 tails, his sword encountered something unexpected. A resistance, then a blade. He drew out a sword that would become Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword. One of the 3 imperial treasures of Japan, the physical symbols of imperial legitimacy, alongside the mirror Yata no Kagami, and the jewel Yasakani no Magatame. Kusanagi no Tsurugi is claimed to reside today at the Atsuda Shrine in Nagoya, where it has not been publicly displayed in living memory. Too sacred to be seen, its existence verified only by tradition and the unbroken continuity of the shrine's priesthood. Some scholars have proposed that the Orochi myth preserves a cultural memory of flood control efforts on the He River in Shimane Prefecture, with the 8 heads representing 8 tributaries that periodically inundated the region. A reading that makes the entire story a mythologized engineering project. The Orochi has since become one of the most influential boss monsters in Japanese popular culture, appearing in Okami, Naruto, the Warriors franchise, and dozens of other properties. Its drunk and dismembered end remaining somehow the most narratively satisfying conclusion to a giant 8-headed river serpent that anyone has ever devised. Typhon. Typhon was the last monster to challenge the Olympians, and he nearly won. Hesiod, writing in the Theogony around 700 BCE, describes him as the most terrible of all the children of Gaia, his upper body reaching to the stars, his wingspan spanning the full width of the world, and from his shoulders rising 100 serpent or dragon heads, each with its own voice, capable of mimicking every sound in the natural world. Bulls, lions, dogs, a sound that no human ear could categorize. When he attacked Olympus, the gods did not stand their ground. They fled to Egypt, transforming themselves into animals as disguises, a detail that ancient writers used to explain why Egyptian gods had animal heads, which is either a brilliant piece of mythological cross-referencing or a very convenient coincidence. Zeus returned to face Typhon alone, and the battle went badly. Typhon overpowered Zeus, reached into his body, and tore out his sinews, the tendons that gave him divine strength, leaving the king of the gods collapsed and helpless on the ground. He hid the sinews in a cave guarded by the she-dragon Delphin. Hermes and Pan, in versions preserved by Apollodorus in the Bibliotheca, recovered them by tricking Delphin, and Zeus was reconstituted and rearmed. The rematch ended under Mount Etna, where Zeus buried Typhon with a final barrage of thunderbolts, and the mountain has been erupting with Typhon's trapped rage ever since. The word typhoon, which describes the most violent category of storm system on Earth, derives directly from his name. His children with the half-serpent echidna constitute essentially the complete inventory of Greek monstrous threats: the hydra, Cerberus, the chimera, the Nemean lion, the Colchian dragon, and according to some sources, the Sphinx. He is the source code from which most of Greek monstrosity runs. In Nonnus's Dionysiaca, composed around 400 CE, the battle receives epic treatment across multiple books. In one sequence, Typhon seizes Zeus's own thunderbolts and wields them against their maker, which is the mythological equivalent of disarming a nuclear power with its own arsenal. That Zeus won it all, given this, suggests either divine resilience or a very good comeback story. The dragon, European. The European dragon runs on a template so durable it has not required meaningful revision in approximately 4,000 years. Hoard treasure, breathe fire, represent chaos and the corruption of the natural order. Wait for a hero or a saint. This narrative structure appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in Beowulf, in the Legend of St. George, and in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, which was published in 1937 by a professional medievalist who understood exactly what he was working with. The Norse tradition provides the most psychologically sophisticated origin for why dragons guard gold. In the Volsunga saga and the poetic Eddas Fafnismal, Fafnir was originally a dwarf who murdered his father for a cursed treasure hoard, and then sat on it with such consuming exclusive greed that he physically transformed into a dragon over time. The gold did not draw the dragon to it, the greed grew the dragon around the gold. Tolkien knew this story extremely well. The Beowulf dragon operates on different but equally compelling internal logic. It had guarded its hoard, undisturbed for 300 years, when a single desperate fugitive stole a single gem-encrusted cup. In retaliation, the dragon burned an entire kingdom. Every night for weeks, it swept the countryside with fire. A reasonable response to a theft? Arguably not. But the dragon's logic isn't a response to the theft. It's a response to the violation of an absolute centuries-long order. And that absolutism is part of what makes the creature genuinely threatening rather than merely large. St. George's dragon in the Golden Legend, compiled by Jacobus de Verhaeghe around 1260 CE, is strikingly different in its resolution. George doesn't kill the dragon immediately. He strikes it, drapes his garter around its neck, and leads it through the city like a dog on a leash, the dragon docile and following, before killing it publicly in front of the population. A Swiss naturalist named Conrad Gessner, in his Historiae Animalium published in the 1550s, included what he presented as a genuine contemporary account of a dragon sighting near Lucerne, complete with physical description and witness testimony, treating it with the same documentary tone he applied to bears and pike. The fully armored medieval dragon, 4 legs, 2 wings, fire breath, venomous bite, hypnotic gaze, represented everything the feudal world feared about power without conscience, and Tolkien's argument in his 1936 essay, Beowulf, The Monsters and the Critics, was that the monster's true power was never physical. It was the psychological weight of something that wants everything and cannot be reasoned with. Smaug, lying on his gold in the dark of the Lonely Mountain for 170 years, is the fullest realization of that idea in literary history. Jörmungandr. Jörmungandr was thrown into the ocean by Odin the moment it was born, an infant, the child of Loki, and the giantess Angerboda. Because prophecy had already determined what it would become. It grew. Without limit, without stopping, curling around the ocean floor of Midgard until its body encircled the entire world and its mouth reached its own tail, which it bit. This is the Ouroboros, the world-encircling serpent eating itself. And while the image appears in Egyptian funerary texts as early as the Amduet around 1550 BCE and in Greek alchemical manuscripts centuries before the Norse sources were written down, the Norse version carries a structural weight the others don't. In Egyptian and Greek contexts, the serpent eating its tail represents cyclical time or the boundary of the known world, a symbol. In Norse cosmology, Jörmungandr's grip is load-bearing. The world holds its shape because the serpent holds its tail. When the grip releases, Ragnarök has not merely begun, the release is Ragnarök. The Prosa Edda and the Poetic Edda give Jörmungandr the most precisely described death in Norse mythology. At Ragnarök, Thor and the world serpent meet as they were always going to meet. Thor kills it with Mjolnir. He then takes 9 steps, the Völuspá specifies 9, and falls dead from the venom the serpent breathed as it died. Not 8 steps, not 10, not a collapse at the moment of impact. 9 steps, then death. The number resonates across Norse cosmology: 9 worlds on Yggdrasil, 9 nights of Odin's ordeal, 9 daughters of Aegir. The specificity feels intentional in a way that distinguishes the world serpent's death from every other death in the Norse corpus. Thor had tried to kill it once before, in the fishing episode preserved in the Hymiskvida. Sitting in a boat with the giant Hymir, using an ox head as bait, he pulled the serpent to the surface and raised Mjolnir for the killing blow before Hymir cut the fishing line in panic and the serpent sank back into the deep. The world survived that day because a giant lost his nerve. Its name, Jörmungandr, translates roughly as the great beast of the earth, and its epithet, Midgard Sormr, the Midgard serpent, describes not a creature living in the world, but a creature that is the world's boundary. It is not contained by the ocean. It is the reason the ocean has an edge. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.